Welcome back to the Cruise Elite Podcast. What's up, Tony?
Good morning, Taylor.
What's happening?
So I've been training with the band.
Oh, yes.
I got the voodoo floss.
Nice.
And then I've been doing some knee circle type stuff and trying to figure out what works. I don't have a squat rack set up right now, so I don't have two opposing posts.
Right.
But I have been playing with the direction.
Cool.
And messing around with it. And training's been going great.
Excellent. That's great.
Yeah. It's not like a night and day thing for me.
Yep.
I definitely notice that the direction of the rotation matters. If I go counterclockwise, it kind of bothers it. If I go clockwise, I feel like I'm getting a nice smooth pressure against the ligament.
Nice.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that little
Yeah, that's
update.
awesome. I'm glad you started exploring that. You'll have to hit me with any questions as you start to work with it some more, and then hopefully you can find some anchor points and work with that multi-directional one.
Yeah, I think I just need to, I had a squat rack set up down here, and I just kind of realized like the space felt too multi-purpose. It's like the gym and also the studio. So I ended up taking it down and I just have like a big pile of kettlebells and like a sandbag and stuff over there instead, just because it's just the feng shui, man. It just works better.
Totally.
I miss the barbell.
Yeah, I can relate. Before we do this podcast, when I'm like, oh crap, it's almost 10:30, and I run into this other side room we have, and I basically just go whoosh, and I push like tons of fly tying material out of the way off my desk into this basket that I have on the side. And then I slap my laptop down, set up the microphone, get the headphones, and I'm like, okay, now it's a recording studio. But I don't like it. I like in our next place, when we're out of this place, I will set up a dedicated, corner for podcast recording for sure. But it's just kind of a funny thing. It's like both right now, and I've got my hobbies right here on the desk, and
it's a necessity, I think, for most people I know, where it's like the luxury of having a dedicated space for everything is just slightly out of reach for a lot of us for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But that's the dream. It's like you have the home gym and it's dedicated. You've got the podcast set up. You got a shop for your fly fishing and stuff.
That is the dream.
Yeah. So you make your own flies, right? You were telling me earlier.
I'm a passionate fly tyer. It's actually like some days I don't know what I like better, tying flies or fly fishing. And it's just sometimes it's just one or the other. And a lot of the times it's just a combination. But yeah, man, I started tying my own flies when I was 7 years old. And that was years before I even started fly fishing. So the actual like craft of tying flies just appealed to me really early in life, and it's something that I do a lot.
So this is going to be a weird question, but like the idea is to make it as lifelike as possible.
Well, so it depends, right? So there's so many different ways to approach it. There's the idea that you want to make something that's realistic, right? Because just logic is, common. Logic is like, well, we want it to look real, like a bug, so that the fish is tricked and, they eat it, and then the other way that people like to do it is it's art, right? It just looks good to you, right? The artist, you're putting natural materials and synthetic materials on a hook, and you're kind of crafting something that just looks good to your eye, and it may not look that realistic to a fish, but it's colorful and it's got all these, qualities to it. And so I go in and out of both, right? Sometimes I'm trying to tie stuff that's realistic. Other times it's just for me, and I'm putting different materials on a hook because it looks cool. But at the end of the day, it's cool because it all works.
Yeah.
It all works. Yeah.
So the difference between like a prefab run-of-the-mill fly and like a handmade one from a lifelong expert like yourself, like, do you notice a difference in the yield?
Yeah, you see the difference in creativity. The fact is, today in the industry, the flies that you can buy from, commercially
Mm-hmm.
are actually really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it never used to be like that, but it is now. But if you are getting flies from somebody who's been tying their whole life, there's just always more creativity that goes into it. There's more time. There's sometimes more durability. There's a lot of good things that come from tying your own flies. It's your interpretation too, like I don't use store-bought flies.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to tie my own because there's something about spending a night tying some flies that you think look cool.
Yeah.
And you think it's going to get the job done. And then the next morning you go and fish them and boom, you catch an awesome fish. And it's just part of the experience.
Yeah. I guess what I was getting at was, do you notice a difference in your catches?
No,
No,
not really.
no.
Yeah. There's little things you can do to a fly. Like you might actually pick up on the fish liking a certain color, or sometimes we put weight on the flies so they sink faster, or we take weight away so that they don't sink fast. And sometimes you will find one of those qualities and figure out that it is catching you more fish.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, all the flies work pretty well. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. So it's not like you go out with a buddy with the same rod and the same everything, and you have two different topologies of flies and you see which one.
Oh, it does go down like that sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does go down. Sometimes the fish get super picky and you've got the fly that's working and your buddy's pissed. Yeah, and then you're handing out the fly that's working for that day. So yeah, it absolutely can work that way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I just see a parallel with some of these interventions that we talk about, and it's like you have to do assessments. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is like, did that actually make it better today, or am I just feeling better today?
Mm-hmm.
And like sometimes it's hard for me to know which is which, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like obviously you do something before and then you do the intervention and you assess, and like, but like sometimes I just wonder like how much of that is I've got a little more spring in my step today.
Sure.
Yeah. Or is it the fly, or are you just getting lucky?
Oh, totally. That's the mind game in fly fishing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, was it really the weather? Like, it's ridiculous what fly anglers will come up with for excuses on a bad day of fishing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's like, it's the full moon. Like, it was the barometric pressure. Oh, it's endless. Yeah, it's hilarious. Yep. It's what we do to ourselves. We torture ourselves. People think fly fishing is like, they have it in their head that it's this like peaceful time that you spend outside. And no, like, it's probably sunny every time you go and the birds are chirping and it's beautiful. No, I go in like the worst weather, freezing cold, like perilous conditions, torture myself. I don't eat. I don't go to the bathroom. I hike miles. Like, yeah, it's the exact opposite of that.
That's funny. That, if you ever wanted to, I think that there's space in the podcast sphere for a podcast all about that stuff. I think that could be really fun.
Yep.
But yeah, man, why don't we shift gears to what this podcast is about?
Let's do it.
Which is applied neurology.
Yeah.
Just to set the table for us, we have been talking a lot about interventions for pain and for injury,
right?
And helping people move and feel better in spite of kind of those setbacks.
Right.
I thought it would be really cool if today we focused on not dealing with injury or pain, but dealing with performance in athletics and optimizing performance in athletics.
Yeah, it's great.
And you've hinted at this in a bunch of episodes, but I just thought we could do a deep dive into some of the things that you've seen work, that you've tried, and just go from there.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. The fact is, it's probably not going to be possible to have these conversations without talking about pain to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fact is, when you work with an athletic population, athletes are generally not seeking out specialized help until something hurts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're really no different than the general population, right? The general population's not seeking out specialized work until something hurts. Right. And so when I was thinking about doing this podcast, my first thoughts were, oh, it's really interesting because in my mind, there's not a huge difference between what we would call the general population and the athletic population in terms of what I'm doing and why they're finding me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But then the way that we do it, in terms of the way that we use these applied neurology tools, is different because athletes end up requiring different things. And you often have to approach the process with sometimes more volume, more intensity, more creativity. So it's interesting in that way. But when I first was thinking about this, I'm like, I don't do that many different things with athletes. It's interesting because it's, you're still working on a human being, right? And you're still taking them through all the neurologic assessments that we take anybody through so that you can learn about how their brain and nervous system is functioning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting in that way.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess in my mind, like I'm imagining like a football coach or like a golf coach. And it's like they've got an athlete and they just want to squeeze more performance out of them. They want
Yes.
them to be able to sprint a little faster or hit a little harder or drive the ball further up, the green. And I wonder if that's maybe like a bit of a trope, right? Like that we could find something that could unlock that performance.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say about that?
I actually look at it that way. So when it comes to athletic performance, especially with higher level athletes, you are trying to squeeze out every little bit of performance that is within that individual, because most athletics, with most sport performance, it doesn't come down to making the athlete significantly better at everything.
Mm-hmm.
But usually with a higher level athlete, if you make them a little bit better, I mean a teeny bit better
Mm-hmm.
at one or two things, that is the differentiator in performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do look at it that way. You are trying to squeeze out just a little bit of performance, and you have to, as the coach, you have to know what category or what area would be the highest payoff area to squeeze out that bit of performance. Right?
Yeah.
That's what's super key. And that's very different than being a coach and developing an athlete. Right? So, for example, I coached wrestling, high school wrestling, for 4 years. And, I'm coaching boys that are, showing up at like 14 years old up until, being a senior in high school. And those are developmental years, right? So we are working on things in terms of athletic performance. We are working on basic strength, right? We're working on balance. We're
Mm-hmm.
working on coordination, and we're doing it in a fairly general way. And then, of course, we're wrestling, right? But that's developmental, and that's very different than working with a professional athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And they already have a lot of those foundations. And so then the question is, how can I make you a little bit better at one thing so that you can progress? Because at that point, you get a lot of higher level athletes that are pretty maxed out.
Yeah.
In terms of what they're capable of. Very rarely do you get someone who still has, a ton of potential left in terms of like building those maps, right? Like they're doing a lot of stuff. I mean, a professional athlete's job during the day is all based around training. I mean, we're talking
Mm-hmm.
8 hours of time dedicated to being better at their sport. So they're doing a lot of stuff. So you have to figure out, like, where can I squeeze out that performance?
Yeah. The example that comes to mind, and I'm probably dating myself a bit, but I'm thinking about Shaquille O'Neal and the hack-a-Shaq strategy, where it was basically like, yeah, he's not very good at free throws. We can't defend against him, so just foul him and make him go to the, free throw line. And so then when Phil Jackson, that was his strategy against him. And then when he ended up coaching him, what did he do? He made him practice free throws all the time so that other coaches couldn't use that strategy against him.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
he got better at free throws. So it's like that little thing made that strategy less potent.
Totally.
So you can pick this example up and run with it, or you can pick another one that from your experience. But, you know, like what would you do if you had a player like Shaq and he just needs to get better at free throws? Like where do you start with that?
Vision. Just make their eyes better. I mean, obviously there's so many things that you can do with an athlete. But if you're to pick one thing for most athletes, if you train there's other things I want to mention too, but generally speaking, if you were to improve something in an athlete, if it was their vision, right? And I don't just mean how clearly they see something, right? We've talked about vision training and a lot of the different things that go into it. If you improve a person's visual system, everything gets better. And there's some interesting things where I feel that's the case, right? If you improve somebody's breathing, everything gets better, right? If you improve somebody's balance, everything gets better. So there are some higher order things that I'm always thinking about with athletes, but the visual system is probably sitting at the top there. And if you think about with sports, I mean, gosh, you know, in most sports, well, in a lot of sports, right? It's the world of milliseconds, right? A fraction of a second goes a long way. A fraction of a second separates last place from first place. I mean, if you watch certain sports where their time matters and racing and stuff. So how do you get faster, right? This is a big deal to me, and I still think that the industry is so far behind. I don't care what industry you're talking about. Like professional athletes are so far behind on what is actually available for training now, based on what we know and the education that we now have as coaches. It's the average person doesn't realize that, but most professional athletes have no idea they can train their vision. Now there are some people that go that extra distance and learn about it and figure it out. But it's amazing that people don't know this. But if you improve a person's visual competency, that is where speed comes from. It comes from decision making. And it comes from how quickly can you take in visual information and make the correct decision with it. That's literally, if you can do that quicker than somebody else, you're going to have better performance than them. Yeah. And it's not just I'm not even talking about just speed, right? We're not just talking about like racing, right? Of some kind. Court sports, field sports, where you have to make very fast decisions. Most of the decisions that we make in sport are based on input that we're taking in through our eyes. I mean, that is it. And we talked about my history a little bit in the podcast that we did on the visual system. I won't tell the long version of the story, but it is worth mentioning. So I grew up, playing youth soccer. That kind of morphed into lacrosse. Lacrosse was my passion growing up, 6th grade through high school. And I had some fairly significant visual deficits when I was that age. And as I kind of came up the ranks in playing lacrosse, and this visual deficit became, more of a problem, I got to the point where I started to hate lacrosse. And I started to hate playing the games. Right? I loved the stick skills and being a physical athlete and the running and all of that. But when it came to practicing and then game day, I got a tremendous amount of anxiety that ultimately led me to quit the sport. And that was happening to me because of my visual deficits. And again, I don't mean that I couldn't see the ball clearly. I corrected that with contact lenses. So I could see clearly enough to play. What I mean is I had something called a visual suppression, which means that my visual system, when it reached a certain level of fatigue, my brain would choose to not use my right eye anymore. This is what a visual suppression basically means. Your brain takes one of your eyes offline, and it really messes up your ability to converge and diverge, which is, think about like tracking. In this case, we're talking about lacrosse. When you catch the lacrosse ball, your eyes have to track it right into your stick. That is the idea of converging, where when your eyes track a ball and your eyes come inward to do that. And then if you were to throw the ball, as you watch the ball travel away from you, that's a different skill called divergence, where now your eyes are traveling away from you towards the horizon. And when you have a visual suppression and one eye gets really fatigued, your brain basically goes, all right, well, the right eye sucks right now, so why would we use that? It's going to cause us to make more mistakes. Let's compensate and dominate with, for these visual skills, dominate with the other eye. And it messes you up. It messes up a lot of different little things with your vision, and it makes playing, for example, lacrosse really stressful. Of course, I didn't know any of this was going on. This is not something that you can consciously be aware of necessarily.
Right.
And so for me, it was coming out as frustration because I was, missing the ball when I shouldn't have missed it. It came out as a building of anxiety before playing games that ultimately decreased my performance when we were playing. And because your eyes are so much involved in cognition, I found that eventually the game of lacrosse to me felt like the same learning difficulties I was having in the classroom.
Yeah.
And so now the anxiety that I felt in the classroom, because this visual stuff affected me in the classroom as well, that anxiety that I was feeling in the classroom was now creeping out into the athletic field. And sports for me was my outlet to get away from the anxiety that I felt academically. And now it was all kind of meshing together. And ultimately it made for a really lousy experience for me in high school. So what did I do? I quit playing lacrosse after my sophomore year, which was something that was really hard for me to do. There was a lot of stress, a lot of weight on my shoulders from that. You're a high school kid, you get a phone call from the coach, and that's scary. So I had to go through all that. I had to call him back, literally call this guy.
Was the coach a hard ass?
Yeah, he was. We were a very good team in high school, always competing for, state championships. And honestly, it felt like a business. It's just one of those things. Affluent community, very competitive sports. It was a business, right? Unfortunately, we were kind of victims of that. It's still going on, worse now than it was when I was growing up. That's for sure.
Really?
Yeah. So yeah, that was very stressful for me, and I ultimately quit playing lacrosse because of these visual issues that I had. And what did I do? I gravitated towards and picked up wrestling. And that's the story I told in that other podcast, where wrestling was much more appealing to me. I got to use the physicality that I used on the lacrosse field, but now I got to grab a person and hold on to them and not have to rely so much on my visual skills. I now was able to rely on my proprioceptive skills, right? And that's where I really succeeded, was with those skills. And so wrestling for me, I was able to pick up, and I picked it up very late in the game. Considering when I started as a junior in high school, I did very well considering I had very little exposure to the sport, but I was able to use my athleticism to my advantage without my visual skills holding me back. However, there was one thing that eventually did at least affect my performance that was vision-based. It was actually my peripheral vision. I had worse peripheral vision on my left side. It was my the upper left quadrant. When we test people's peripheral vision, this is something I do with every athlete, by the way. We test their peripheral vision because peripheral vision is such a important aspect of sport. And mine was weaker in the top left quadrant. And so whenever I was to get taken down in wrestling, guess where the opponent came from?
Top left quadrant.
Top left every time. Boom, attacking my left leg. Now, of course, I didn't know this as a wrestler. This is all came to me later on when I started learning about neurology and testing my peripheral vision. And then all of a sudden it hit me. I'm like, son of a gun.
Yeah.
Every time I got taken down, it would come from the same direction. It was always on the same leg. And guess what? I also had several injuries. I had several injuries where I collided heads with somebody a few times coming from that upper left. And then sure enough, when I got into jiu-jitsu so many years later, in like 10 days of getting into jiu-jitsu and getting those juices flowing again of a grappling sport, of course, somebody's head smashes into me and cuts open my left eye. Right? Because it was an accident. They hit me and we wear, the gis.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was a lot of my wrestling habits were holding me back with jiu-jitsu at the beginning because I was wrestling and they were doing jiu-jitsu. And so I was leading with my head in my face because in wrestling, that's a weapon.
Yeah.
It's different in jiu-jitsu. So I'm leading with my head in my face and somebody hits me and the cloth of the gi is very rough, I guess you would say. And it cut me. But it cut me on the upper left part of my eye. And I was like, damn, there's that peripheral vision again.
What do they call it? The gentle
art?
The gentle art, yeah.
Supposed to be gentle. They say when you get really good, you just flow, and it doesn't feel like that to me, man. Like, especially in the gi, you're tangled up in a bathrobe and somebody's trying to choke you.
Yeah, strangle you with it. Interesting. So we had an episode about the visual system, and per usual, if you haven't heard it, I do recommend you go back and listen to that because that's a wealth of information.
For sure.
And in that episode, you mentioned, a lot of people have visual deficits that they don't know about.
Yep.
And like you said, it's not just they need eyeglasses. Like it's stuff that you might not perceive, but that's hindering you and causing your threat to go up, causing you to not be able to perform at your highest. So
yeah, well said.
My instinct based on what you're saying is that if you just target the visual system, generally, that there is a lot to gain there in performance, potentially.
Yeah, no question. Like, put it this way. This is literally how strongly I feel about this. I could work with an athlete for 5 years, and I could help them improve their strength and their balance and all that stuff that we try to do with people. 5 years of strength training, to me, I'm talking for a high level athlete. Remember, this is the person we're trying to squeeze 1 or 2 more drops of potential and performance out of this person. They already have their foundations. 5 years of strength training to me is not as valuable as 6 weeks of training the athlete's visual saccades, which a visual saccade is moving your eyes very quickly back and forth from one target to another target. That's one of our basic visual drills. I would rather do 6 weeks of intensive visual saccade work than 5 years of strength training at that point. Because of what I mentioned before, if you can make a person's eyes faster and more responsive and better at taking in information from the outside world, they make faster decisions, and reflexively, a lot of good things happen, right? There's a big difference between what vision training gives us reflexively compared to what we would look at as voluntary control or strength training. This is actually a really good thing to point out. So when you look at sport performance training, most of what we do in a gym context, right? We get underneath a barbell, we do squats, we do lunges, we do jumping exercises for power, whatever the case might be. All of that stuff is very voluntary. Okay, you are in a very controlled environment. You have weight, maybe. You're making the decision to make a voluntary movement. And that is still very important for your training because you have to train those qualities. You have to put mechanical stress on your body in order to get it to adapt and get stronger, or to get your tissues to adapt to greater loads, right? That's all very important. However, there are different types of control that we have. So we think about it like this. So voluntary control is one of them. That's when you make a decision to lift a weight. That's a voluntary movement. Curl the weight, press the weight, whatever. We also have what's called anticipatory control to movement. So before we make any kind of voluntary movement, your brain and nervous system is basically predicting what's going to happen before it happens. And that anticipatory control is a reflexive system that stabilizes you for what you're about to do. So imagine, you reach out and you pick up a weight. If you didn't have proper stabilization through your trunk, right? You'd go to pick up that weight and you probably couldn't move it very efficiently because you didn't have a foundation to move it off of.
Yeah.
And if you did pick it up with a lousy foundation, you'd topple over or you'd be at risk for injury because you didn't have the proper.
That as bracing, right?
Yes. Yeah. Except bracing, like taking a breath, right, and packing it away, that's voluntary stability. So that's back to, okay, I'm making the decision to take a deep breath in and pack it. And that's a form of creating voluntary stabilization through your breathing.
Right.
Now that is very important if you're going to go under very heavy loads. You need additional stability to help stabilize your spine. The type of stability that I'm talking about, which is in that anticipatory control family, is predictive in nature. And your brain is basically taking in sensory information and predicting what's about to happen. And then you are reflexively getting stabilization. You don't have to think about this because, remember, it's reflexive. I should just make this example in case people have a hard time understanding what I mean by reflexes. So everybody, or at least most people, have gone to the doctors, at least when they were a kid. They put you on the table. They took a reflex hammer. They tapped your patellar tendon, and all of a sudden your leg jumped off the table by itself.
Yeah.
And it's just a really funny, you're a young kid, you're laughing. You're like, that was weird. I didn't do that. That's what I mean by reflex, right? You can't control it, right? It just happens. So reflexive stabilization is stabilization that you don't have to put any conscious thought into. It's just there.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
It's just there. So anticipatory control is very, very important. So I'm going to come back to that idea in a minute. We talked about the voluntary. Now we also have reactionary control. So reaction-based control is essentially, it's about decision making, right? And a large part of reactionary core control comes from the decisions that you make based on your visual system, right? Because think about what it is to be an athlete. You're moving most of the time based on what you see. And there's a lot of control that we get based on those decisions that, again, is reflexive, that we don't have to make decisions about. So we've got anticipatory control, we've got voluntary control, we've got reactionary control. Now, voluntary control is what all athletes are practicing all the time. You're going to the gym, you're lifting weights, you're doing plyometrics, you're doing all that stuff. That's great. We need that. There's no question about it. However, when you actually look at movement, voluntary control makes up the smallest percentage of the total output. So anticipatory and reactionary based controls are actually, you could argue, more important. And those are the ones that people are not training because they just simply don't know about them and don't know how to target them. So when we ask the question, okay, so we've got anticipatory control, we got to train that. That sounds like better core strength. That's really what it is, right? How do we target it? And when you look at all the different tools that we have in applied neurology, the system that is going to target both anticipatory and reactionary control the best is the visual system.
Interesting.
Yeah. So no matter what kind of vision exercise you're doing, there's lots of different things that we teach. I mentioned visual saccades. Those are rapid eye movements back and forth between targets. I mentioned convergence and divergence, where we're tracking an object in towards our face, tracking it out away from our face. We
Pencil
have,
push-ups.
yeah, pencil push-ups. Yeah. Near far jumps are a very prolific visual skill in sport where it's the speed that your eyes move from focusing on a close target to a far target, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The speed at which you actually focus and bring the target into clear vision is a very important athletic skill. Okay, it's like the skill of accommodation, right? Your eyes being able to focus fast. So there's all these different things. And it just so happens the neural circuitry between your eyes and the rest of your body is vast, and all of the reflexive control that we get for movement comes from your eyes. So when you understand that equation, or you think about that as like a pie chart, and you see this little itty bitty piece of the pie that represents voluntary movement, we call it 10%. I don't know the real percentage, but that's what we call in a teaching environment, 10% of the total output. You see that and you're like, so the entire industry is based around this little 10% wedge of the pie. Well, I want to target the other stuff because it makes up so much. And so that's why when you kind of ask me about squeezing out all the performance from an athlete, like, what do you think about first? And I think about the eyes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's like improving the speed of your hard drive.
Yeah.
It's like, you can add more capacity, but if you want it to be faster, that's what you need to target.
Yes. Yeah.
Such a nerdy analogy. I'm sorry.
No, it's good, dude. It's good. I like it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I have a question about drilling.
Yeah.
So, in a lot of sports and in musical practice as well, one of the things that you'll do is you will drill a movement. When I did boxing, it was, your left, right strikes. And I wonder if there's something about that isn't purely practicing the movements as such, but also moving that motion into the reaction part of your brain as opposed to the voluntary part of your brain. What do you think about that?
So it makes me think about the difference between internal and external focus with training. So this is critical. So the enemy of efficiency when it comes to sport is tension in the body. Right? So when you watch great athletes do their thing, it always looks the same. They make difficult things look easy. And when you see amateur athletes doing the same types of things, they look more rigid. There's more tension in their body, right? That's very obvious to see. Any coach or person that enjoys watching sports usually can tell the difference between high level and amateur because of that, whether or not that's what they call it. But good athletes make hard things look easy. And when you're drilling, okay, a coach's worst nightmare is an athlete that has an internal focus. Okay. And what I mean by internal focus is they're focusing on what their body feels like when they're performing a skill. Okay. And this is important to talk about because guess what? There are so many coaches out there making the biggest mistake you could make in coaching, which is telling your athlete, hey, on this next one, I want you to feel this.
Right.
Feel what? Oh, feel your right arm. Feel your right foot. Think about rotating. Okay. I mean, I'm still guilty of this when I try to teach people how to move better because sometimes you just have to explain stuff in that way. But what you'll notice if you're observant is the more you get an athlete to focus on what they feel in their own body, the more their performance decreases. And the reason for that is because when you take an internal focus and you change, well, it changes your intention drastically with movement. And neurologically, it increases intramuscular tension in your body. Mm-hmm. This is something that I show people all the time in our community and when we were doing like our free mobility challenges, because I would tell people, if you're going to train mobility, you have to understand that the intention can't always be internal. The focus can't always be internal because it actually takes away your mobility. And you can try this on yourself. If our listeners want to do a little experiment right now, you can just bring your arm out to your side and actively pull it back behind you so that you're doing like what would be like a pec stretch, mm-hmm. and focus on the stretch that you feel, right? So pull your arm back as far as it goes, focus on the stretch that you feel in the pec region, and only focus on that feeling. Like you're stretching your pec, right? And you're putting your attention there, and it's an internal kind of focus. And then go ahead and relax, but notice how far you went, okay? Now, on the next time that you try it, look at something behind you first. For me, I have a picture that's sitting behind me. I'm going to use my eyes. I'm going to look at it, okay? I'm going to be thinking about where that is as I bring my arm back out to the side. Mm-hmm. And now I want the goal to be to bring your arm to the picture behind you or whatever it is that your target is. So just go ahead and make the same movement. No. And I went like 40 degrees more.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can try that at home. And usually for most people, they'll find a drastic improvement in the efficiency of movement and how far they're able to go. And the reason for that is because this is crazy. Think about how powerful your brain is. When you shift your focus to being more internal, it just increases tension in your body. There's more muscular tension there that you now have to work against. It's kind of serving as a kind of an emergency brake system, I guess. Like now you have tension to work against.
Yeah, it's that bracing almost, but you didn't realize that's what you were doing.
Yeah, you're increasing. Yeah, exactly. So you're increasing tension. So, from an athletic performance standpoint, if all you ever do is tell your athlete to focus on their body and what they're feeling, what you're actually doing to them is increasing the amount of tension that they have to work against. And you're going to see things like decreases in performance, whether that's speed, because guess what? The enemy of efficiency is tension in the body. Tension will slow down speed. Tension will decrease mobility. Okay, so and those are the types of qualities that we need if we're going to move athletically. So the other side of this coin is, what if we can shift our attention to being more external, like we just did with that little stretch experiment? Okay, if you can have external targets, things within your training that give you a target that is not, hey, what do I feel? Mm-hmm. And guess what? The easiest way to do this is, what do I see? Okay. So drilling becomes very important in terms of using the right type of focus, because when it comes down to doing your sport in a live situation, real time, competition, you don't want to be thinking about what you feel. You want to be reacting to what you see.
Yeah.
And that will improve your practice. Now, there are instances where changing the intention to what you feel is useful, right? And I do this with people when I am trying to help them improve their body awareness and their proprioception. Sometimes we have to do that because they don't feel their body very well. Mm-hmm. And so if I make things a little bit too external, for certain individuals, it might not work as well as getting them to feel things a little bit more. But athletically, what you generally see most of the time is that an external focus is going to bring out better performance. So when you're boxing, right? When you're boxing and stuff, imagine boxing and hitting the bag or focus mitts or something. I mean, imagine hitting focus mitts with somebody who actually knows how to guide that. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen, you've probably seen that. It's pretty impressive. Like a good coach who knows how to guide focus mitt training. It's pretty cool. Imagine doing that and trying to feel your own body, like how hard that would make things.
Right.
versus
Right.
like reacting to the focus mitts and what you're seeing, but also the auditory cues you're getting from the coach. Totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different. So try teaching somebody a skill where all you're talking about is, or asking them to do, is feel their body versus giving them external targets. You give them external targets, in most cases, you'll see a drastic upgrade in performance without doing any training.
As we're talking about this, I have a strong suspicion that I was leaving some pounds on the table with my squat because I was just so focused on where my knees were and creating tension in the glute and very slowly going into the, into the bottom position and like just overthinking the whole thing. I
Dude,
have I have a strong feeling that I had, 20 something pounds on the bar I could have put up at least.
dude, most injuries happen with internal focus.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the unlucky injuries that happen on the playing field, right? Where there's so many changing variables, you can't control them, right? You get unlucky. Somebody or something strikes you from a different direction. You're in a weird position. Speed plus weird range of motion maybe, equals an injury. But the type of injury that happens to athletes when they're just training, oftentimes it's internal focus. I mean, I got myself injured. It wasn't horrible, but it set me back. And I
Mm-hmm.
was doing, this was a couple winters ago, and I was really focused on improving the strength of my Zercher squat.
Okay.
And I was putting way too much internal focus on what I was feeling in my legs.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, I'll call it an injury. I mean, it set me back a few weeks, but I was like, that was so dumb. Like, I should have just had a target set up for myself. Like, I should have been using my eyes, like, move my eyes to where, like, look at where I want my hips to end.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in the hole on the squat, like, get your hips to the wall.
Mm-hmm.
That's an external way of thinking about things. Or using like a metronome. When you hear that metronome, you react to it and you
Mm-hmm.
think about where do you want to get your hips to. Those types of cues work really well, and you won't build up as much internal tension that could work against you.
So I've got one for you. One that really helped me with deadlifts was where I had my eyes at the bottom of the lift and
Yep.
where I had my eyes at the top of the lift.
Sure.
So at the top, looking straight ahead, at the bottom at like a 45-degree towards the ground. And those visual cues, I feel, helped, me align my body
Totally.
advantageously. So I've been doing a lot of kettlebell work lately.
Mm-hmm.
And kettlebell swings, for whatever reason, like I was doing a strong first coach for a while and
Mm-hmm.
like really got into that like hard style kettlebell thing.
Nice.
And swings, I feel like I can just get so in my head about like where's the bell at the bottom? Where am I creating tension? How fast am I snapping up to the top?
Right.
And the other day I just decided, I was like, at the bottom, look down with like you would at the deadlift, and at
Mm-hmm.
the top, look straight ahead
Mm-hmm.
and like try not to think about the rest of it. And that was really helpful. It just made for a more fluid,
You're naturally using ocular reflexes too, and it's quite a useful training tool. So when you look down, it briefly facilitates more flexor tone.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're at the bottom of a hip hinge,
Yeah.
right, that's a flexor based movement at the hips, and that's why looking down can sometimes help that. But then as you're coming out of the backswing, coming up, looking straight ahead really is jumping your eyes from down to up.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you move your eyes from down to up, you momentarily facilitate more extensor tone,
Mm-hmm.
which is, going to help you rise up. It's going to help your whole posterior chain. Those are your extensor muscles. So utilizing your eyes and how you move actually is a very great way to use ocular reflexes in the gym. And it is a way of making things more externally focused.
Yeah. The other connection I wanted to draw on what you've been talking about is when we just did that pec stretch.
Yeah.
When we were stretching, looking straight ahead, thinking about our pec, we were moving our body into the blind map.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And when you looked back, all of a sudden you had way more range of motion, granted, because you were no longer in a blind space. I find that really, really interesting. You mentioned this in the last
isn't that
episode
crazy?
or two.
Yeah.
So yeah, just being intentional about where you're looking can be so powerful in like what your body is allowing itself to do.
I mean, it is ridiculous. Like if people really knew, like what you just said, just seeing what was back there gave you maps that didn't exist before, right? That visual input is so, hierarchical, unlike a hierarchical way of looking at it. It's like your eyes are basically going to dictate how far you can go and how efficiently you're going to get there. So, I mean, if you think about that too, I know we want to stay on the athletic performance kind of path here, but like flexibility, it's an athletic quality. A lot of the flexibility systems, right, that build, are supposed to build flexibility, they're all internally focused. I mean, very rarely are people using external targeting. And there's some good ones out there and some people that know this, and they're using props and things to move around or move over. And that's using your eyes to.
So one caveat is I've also been doing yoga pretty regularly right now. And yeah, you're focusing on turning your body or whatever, but they will give you visual cues.
Yes,
they look up, look this direction, look over your shoulder.
Yep.
So
yeah, they do.
Just to give some credit to the flexibility.
Totally.
Stuff.
There's a lot of good cueing in yoga. Yeah, and they do use the eyes quite a bit and actually do some at least some forms of yoga do some visual exercises, like some focus on convergence and stuff. Pretty cool.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't run across that yet. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You were making a point about flexibility being internally focused.
Yeah. So the point was just most of the systems that are about flexibility are like mostly based around keeping your attention internal, right? Which means you're fighting your own tension. Yep.
Moving away from the visual system, are there any other examples of applied neurology unlocking athletic potential for people?
Yeah. The other ones that come to mind, if we're thinking like lowest hanging fruit, things that have, biggest bang for the buck, the vestibular system is going to be huge, right? Because that's your compass, right? That's the system that's helping you understand which way you're going, which way is up, and has so much to do reflexively. There's that word again. Has so much to do reflexively with the way that you stabilize and balance your body. It's also tied into your autonomics and your respiration, right? Your blood flow. So very important stuff if you're an athlete. Vestibular system's huge. And then, of course, just breathing, right? Training your breathing. Yeah, it's amazing. So in the last about 5-6 years, I've worked with quite a few endurance athletes. And, athletes are all the same. They come in, they're like, they already know this. They're like, all right, we need to squeeze out one little bit of performance out of me so I can, get a little better. And, what should it be? And when I worked with the endurance athletes, I would say, you should train your breathing. And they're like, what? And I'm like, that's a shocker to you? You're an endurance athlete. Right? And so it's just funny, right? It's like I never thought of training my breathing before. Right? And so I get all endurance athletes to train their breathing, and man, it's a big deal. It really helps them.
So yeah, what's a good example of that? Like what's a training technique that you used, and what was the result with a client?
Okay, so there's several different things that we would do. I'll graze over the first one. It's just improving their biomechanics of breathing, which means make the muscles and joints involved with breathing better able to do their job. And so we do things like mobilizing the diaphragm with our diaphragm stretch variations and something we call 3-dimensional breathing, where we're working on rib cage mobility. A lot of endurance athletes have a very tight rib cage because they're essentially hyperventilating all the time. That's what they are. They're professional hyperventilators. They've learned how to hyperventilate and perform for a very long period of time. But the cost to that is some level of issue in their breathing, and sometimes mobility issues with their breathing. And so I always start with kind of the mechanical pieces first, with making sure that they're moving and they're supple in all the areas that need to be supple for better breathing. And from there, it goes into improving CO2 tolerance, where we're using like air hunger exercises by reducing their breathing, teaching them how to tolerate the sensation of air hunger more efficiently, and improving CO2 tolerance. There's a lot of good benefits that come from that. From a performance standpoint, it seems to be very helpful for their overall fitness. Mm-hmm. It's also a great way to improve blood circulation to the whole body. And so CO2 tolerance is a big part of the training. But it's funny. One of the devices or strategies that I've used with great success with quite a few people is having them invest in some kind of resisted breathing device. You've probably seen these things. There's a lot of them on the market now. It never used to be like that. There used to only be like 2 of them on Amazon, and no one knew what they were. Mm-hmm. They look a little different now, but some of them look like mouth guards, and then there's like a device on the end of them, and you put it in your mouth, and you can set the dial to create resistance.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you can do breathing exercises that are resisted, both inhalation and exhalation.
So I think I've only come across these in the context of altitude training.
Right.
Is that the same device, or is that something else?
No, so there's crossover there. See, originally these devices were marketed as something that you could use to improve your performance at altitude. And whether or not that's true, I mean, I think it started out as more of a marketing thing, mm-hmm. right? Kind of a marketing scam. The masks, they put the masks on.
Yeah.
Now, it's not totally a lie, because I believe, I might not be super caught up on like the most current stuff on this right now, but I believe that what I have seen is that improving CO2 tolerance can actually improve your performance at altitude. Mm-hmm. And technically, if you use the masks or the breathing devices in the right way, you can improve your CO2 tolerance, which could help you at altitude. Okay. But what they used to tell you is that, I think the marketing part of it was like, they used to tell you that the mask did something to simulate altitude.
Right. It's like you're breathing the thinner air.
Yeah. And I don't think any of that might not check out.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
So the first devices were kind of marketed like that, fast forward 20 years, and now people are starting to use them more, but it's still unknown. Like, I mean, all the devices out there now, there's some good ones coming out. And of course we have apps for them now that we can do different things with them. You don't need the fancy ones, but I'll have endurance athletes buy a very simple resisted breathing device, and I'll take them through exercises where the focus is on either resisted exhalation or resisted inhalation, and then both. And what that is like lifting weights for your breathing muscles. Mm-hmm.
You have to pull harder. You have to push harder.
You do like fast explosive inhales, and then you do like more like elongated exhales, and you have it's hard. Like, it's really hard. Eventually you build up to a pretty high resistance level. At first you don't start there. That's been incredible.
Interesting.
I mean, incredible. And for professional athletes and also just general pop people. Like, one of my buddies out in Oregon, he's big into mountain biking now. And he called me up one day, and he's also a fly fishing friend of mine. We're talking fishing. He's like, "Hey, I got a question for you about performance." He's telling me, I want to improve my performance. And he's looking at he's got his watch, and he's got all this fitness data now he's into when and riding his mountain bike. And he's like, "What's one thing I could do that would be easy, you could tell me about in this phone call right now, that would help me with my fitness goals?" And I was like, "Dude, buy some sort of resisted breathing device." So I found like the cheapest one I could find on Amazon. It's the same one I have. I don't think it's on the market anymore, though. It's called an Expand-A-Lung, but there's so many devices just like it. It doesn't matter. And he started that. And I gave him a little protocol to do twice a day, where he was basically doing a fast, explosive, resisted inhalation, followed by a more elongated, but also with intent to be fast and explosive with the exhalation. And he would start out with only 10 repetitions, and then he'd do like several sets of 10 repetitions. And then I had him build up to 20 in a row for a couple sets. And he did this twice a day. And every single marker that he wanted to see improve in his fitness based off of like his, he had one of those,
like Garmin or something.
Yeah, he had like some sort of heart rate variability thing too. Everything improved within like 4 weeks. And he called me back and he's like, dude, you weren't kidding. And I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was like, this will be cool because he'll have like data to share and stuff. And he was like, this is incredible. He's like, he's like, I blow through this thing. And, I do that before I ride. It helps me get warmed up right away. He's like, I do it again later in the day. Yeah, pretty cool. And that is the common, response I've seen from other endurance athletes using them too. And they laugh at me when I present this idea to them.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, I thought those devices were completely a scam. And I'm like, does making your breathing muscles stronger sound like a scam? Is that not something you want? No, you want that.
Right. Maybe the way they're marketing it is a scam, but
totally.
Yeah. It's so funny because I just kind of glossed over this, but Pavel Tsatsouline, the kettlebell guy, he had this thing where I think he would call it like a crocodile straw, and he would basically use a straw to do exactly what you're talking about. It like inhibited how much air you could breathe in, so you had to like really suck it in and then blow it out slowly.
Yep, I used straws before I knew about the devices.
Yeah. So is there any material difference? Is it just ergonomically different, or is it pretty?
Yeah,
much
I mean, it's not as good.
Mechanism?
There's no question it's not as good. But in fact, what I like doing better than the straw is actually I do this with clients on Zoom calls because like if I'm working with somebody and then I decide, we better do some resisted breathing, we don't have a resisted breathing device unless they want to invest in that. And so what I do is I have them create a fist, and you just create a fist and you loosen it up. You can put your lips right against your fist, and you can create your own resisted breathing. Now, it's a pain in the butt, but it's a starting point, and it allows us to resist inhalations or resist exhalations. And I might want one or the other. Yeah. Sometimes I only want inhalation. Sometimes I only want exhalation. It depends on what we're doing neurologically. If I'm doing that with people, it's because I'm working with their brainstem, and the difference between inhalation and exhalation actually matters when you're trying to target different divisions of the brainstem. So, but that's just a simple way to start. And so if you were to make a loose fist and the goal was to inhale very fast, like within 2.5 seconds, and then exhale very explosively, but it's going to take you more like 5 to 6 seconds to get a full exhale out. If you did that 10 times resisted at, say, what might feel like 40 to 50% of your max effort, you will be taxed after that, and you will know what I'm talking about in terms of resisting your breathing. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the air hunger element, but then there's also the actual physical muscles that are doing the pushing.
You got it.
Pulling.
Yeah. Okay. When we talk about training your breathing, we have the chemistry category, which is like where the air hunger fits into. That's the CO2 tolerance category. We have the biomechanics category, which is more, let's make the muscles do their job better. Let's strengthen them. Let's make sure we have the mobility for better breathing.
Yeah. So to make Shaq better at free throws, he's got to do visual saccades and these breathing drills. What do we call it? Resisted breathing devices.
Yeah, and I would change it from and I would change it from visual saccades to probably near far jumps.
Right.
Because the amount of time you probably look at the basket and the ball in your hands, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, like that's a real prolific visual skill in something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, this is awesome. Any last nuggets of wisdom? Because I almost feel like we're like right on the verge of you giving us another mind-blowing technique, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So you tell me.
So, oh man, I have a little checklist in front of me and I'm like, wow, we could do this again because there's so much to talk about.
Should we do an episode 2? Because I feel like if you've got more, I mean, I think
possible.
It's well worth it
it's
from
possible.
what we've covered so far.
We'll kick that around because one of the things that we didn't say at the beginning, when it comes to squeezing out all the performance out of an athlete, especially a higher level athlete, you have to consider recovery. Because just improving an athlete's recovery strategies can literally be the differentiator between, not improving their performance versus getting a little bit better. There may be a whole episode around recovery strategies. There's a lot there. But, kind of staying in line with what we discussed today, the importance of training the visual system, training the vestibular system, becoming faster at making decisions. Right. That's the cognitive skill that I feel is the most important to improve any athletic activity, right? Is that decision making. And I kind of wanted to explain a couple of tools or things that people could do that are really pretty accessible.
Okay.
Because we're going to have listeners that are like, okay, cool. I like everything he said. How do I get started? So the first thing is, if you don't know how to juggle, you have to go and learn, because I teach every athlete how to juggle. Now, I'm not an amazing juggler, but I can juggle. Like I can hold my own. Like I can juggle very comfortably, 3 balls or whatever. I taught myself how to do that when I started looking at juggling as an integrated skill that happened to have a bunch of the stuff involved in it that I was teaching people in an isolated fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So hand-eye coordination is the obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And believe it or not, a lot of people are pretty lousy with like their coordination with their hands. That's kind of going out of style. I mean, people don't do as much work with their hands anymore.
Yeah.
And I noticed that, especially with a younger population.
They've got to make flies,
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So we got hand-eye coordination. That's the obvious one. But when you're juggling, you're doing several different visual tasks. And one of them, so you're actually relying on peripheral vision quite a bit, because as you're juggling, you keep your hands within your periphery so that your peripheral vision is constantly being stimulated, and you're working on accuracy with your peripheral vision. That's huge, because peripheral vision is, it is massive in sports. Okay. And then as you're juggling, your eyes are going from, if we're juggling balls or bean bags or whatever, your eyes are going back and forth as you do it.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just like staring through them and using only peripheral vision. You're kind of at the peak, like the apex of where you're throwing the balls, and your eyes are going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And those are our visual saccades.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started looking at juggling like that, I was like, oh man, there's so much like vision training built into this, and we can have fun doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just got on YouTube. Here's what I suggest. Go on YouTube, look up juggling tutorials. There's billions of them. And what I did, and this is what I do with all athletes, they laugh at me. A lot of them, some of them don't even want to do this, but then we do it anyway, because I say we have to, and then they're happy they did it. Because it's more engaging than staring at 2 pencils doing visual saccades, right?
Yeah.
This is more athletic, and it's more integrated. You use your whole body. So what you can do is, because believe it or not, juggling's hard. Like, try to do this. It's very frustrating if you don't have someone to teach you. I bought nylon scarves, right?
Okay.
You can look them up on like Amazon, dancing scarves. I don't know what people call them. Nylon. I don't know. They're colorful. People use them for all different sorts of things. They're like thin mesh, and they're not huge. They're maybe a foot, like, I don't know. They're bigger than a foot, I guess. Maybe like a 1.5 by 1.5. They come in squares, and you get scarves, and you learn how to juggle them, because when you throw them up in the air, they open like a parachute and they fall down slow. And so then you can start to work on your hand-eye coordination and your visual skills in a way that's not as overwhelming. And then little by little, you can graduate to learning how to juggle balls or beanbags or whatever you want. That's an amazing thing to start to do that you can easily work right into your training, and you will be effectively training your visual system. And then what you end up doing from there, this is pretty cool. You take tennis balls and you write letters all over them with a magic marker. So take a Sharpie, just randomly. It could be numbers, it could be letters, it could be both. And you just write them all over the ball. We call these letter balls. And there's so many things you can do with a letter ball, but eventually your juggling has to progress to juggling letter balls. And now as the ball floats up to the apex of where you're juggling, and your eyes make contact with the ball, you call out the letter that you see. So as you're juggling, it's like A, C, W, X, right? Or whatever. And you're now super focused on doing visual saccades with a target that you actually have to identify. And then, of course, you've got all the peripheral vision in there and the hand-eye coordination. And man, we have fun with this. Do it traveling, walking forwards, walking backwards. I have athletes doing all sorts of athletic stuff while they're juggling. It's pretty crazy. Like,
you teach them to get on a unicycle.
Yep, exactly. But that's a really fun thing that people can do. The letter balls, we'll talk about more of these things in the future, but the letter balls are a great thing to play catch with, especially if you're engaged in some kind of ball sport.
Yeah.
Calling out the letters in the air, fantastic visual training. The last thing I'll say that I also think falls into this category is reactionary based type of training. Okay. This is what's missing from people's gym work, right? We go to the gym by accident. The whole thing becomes voluntary. Okay. Remember the differences we talked about: anticipatory, voluntary, reactionary. Okay. Reactionary work is super important. And we want to do something reactionary based on using our eyes. So juggling is that. So that type of thing. But there's other ways to incorporate this stuff. We have what's called a coordination chart. And I program this into all of our workouts, teach about it in the Neuro Dojo, our membership. It never goes out of style. What it is, it's a piece of paper you put up on the wall, and it has 36 images on it. There's a vertical line and a star. The vertical line is always in the same place, but the star is always in one of three places, and there can be slight variations to that. So the star will either be in the middle, meaning it's overlapping the vertical line, so touching it, or the star will be to the left of the vertical line or the right of the vertical line. And these are all very small images because remember, there's 36 on the page. So what we end up doing, it's a lot of fun, and people can make these charts at home, or you just join our membership, and now I program this for you into every single workout you do.
Yeah.
That would be a good way to go to. And we assign 3 movements. Okay. We assign 3 movements to 3 stars. And so just like you would read a page of text or music, as you read the chart, it tells you what movement to do. So let's say middle star was drop squat and right star was spin 90 degrees to your right. And left star was spin 90 degrees to your left. You're now reading the chart as fast as you can, and the chart is telling you what to do. And we can read it from left to right, from right to left. We can read it vertically, top to bottom, bottom to top. And now we're getting all this like directional work with the visual skills, because every little time you move your eyes, it's a visual saccade.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of built in. And it's a way to train your reaction time in a way that is respecting the reflexive systems that we discussed. Because think about this. You say to somebody, okay, we want to make you faster. We want to train your speed. What do? They go and get the agility ladder out. Okay. That's voluntary movement at some point because it just gets really easy, right? You're moving as fast as you can, but you're not training the input systems that dictate how fast the decision's going to be to make the movement. When you start doing things like the coordination chart, which is telling you right, left, center, right, center, right, left, center, right? It's unpredictable, and you're getting faster at making those decisions. So that's a really low-hanging fruit, wonderful way to start to train more of the reactionary style of drill.
Yeah.
And we put that in our warm-ups and our skill sessions constantly because it's just an easy way to work it right into a training session.
So would something like a speed bag tap some of the similar mechanisms there?
Yeah.
Because it's moving fast. You have to respond to it.
Totally. Yeah. Stuff like that's great. Any type of, reacting to anything. So, and it doesn't always have to be visual. Okay. We can use auditory. Could be sound, right? So go, no-go drills are an amazing cognitive training tool where, the game red light, green light?
Yeah.
That's what I do. That's what I do with athletes.
Uh-huh.
You play red light, green light because it basically teaches you to control impulsive behavior.
Huh.
That's what it is. Like I'm doing this right now with our 3.5-year-old daughter.
Uh-huh.
And it is for training her frontal lobe.
Yeah.
And the reason it's for training the frontal lobe is because that's where decision making is housed. And the frontal lobe is one of the brain structures that's going to help us inhibit impulsive behavior. So you know how like when you do a lousy job with red light, green light, or Simon Says, you catch yourself making the mistake and you're like, damn it.
Yep.
Right? So you failed to inhibit impulsive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And athletes who are really good at that, really good at inhibiting that behavior, are the same athletes that move very efficiently, make very intelligent decisions very quickly, and they don't make as many mistakes.
Yeah.
So that's a different form of cognitive style drill that I think is really important. So you can guide that with auditory go, no-go style drills, or it could be visual, right? Where you're seeing different colored lights flash. Stuff like that is awesome, and it's very effective.
Yeah, that's great. I want to go to the Cruise Elite summer camp where I do all these drills and learn how to juggle. And
seriously, that would be
whimsical.
Awesome.
It's whimsical.
Yeah, it would be really cool. You're not the first person to say that. Maybe someday that we'll have something like that.
Yeah, get out to the woods. I feel like that would be on brand. And
yep, it would
get people learning about these applied neurological approaches.
Yeah, seriously.
Awesome, man. Any last words before we wrap?
I think that's it. I think we covered it. What I'm thinking we're gonna have to circle back to in the future, Tony, is more about recovery strategies for athletes.
I love that. That's gonna be
because
great.
you got to recover fast if you want to do any of this stuff. Otherwise, you're just digging a hole you can't fill.
Yeah, and especially with athletes that already have a pretty full plate.
Totally.
I'm imagining people training for a triathlon or people on a competitive sports team, like they're already pushing their bodies to the limit. So I feel like the margin there is small, and anything you can get is probably a big advantage.
Exactly. All right, there it is. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed this piece on athletic performance and how we use applied neurology to target these reflexive systems. Hey, I just wanted to let you know as well, because on the last show, I mentioned that we're going to be we're going through a transition with our monthly membership right now. The goal has been to kind of change up our membership so that it is a supportive place for movement professionals that want to continue their learning in applied neurology. Whether you are just getting started with learning applied neurology or you've actually taken our Neuro Dojo course, our membership has transformed for you. It is done and it is happening. And one of the things that we've done inside the membership is each month we've dedicated it to a theme that has to do with neuro. So currently we're in the vision training month. And so once a week, I get on a live call with our members and I teach you how to train your visual system and how to correct some of the deficits that we commonly find with the visual system. Every single month is going to be dedicated to a new theme. And the way that we pick those themes is by polling our community to see what people really want to learn. So if you're in a position where you're ready to take that next step and get involved in actually doing the things that we're talking about here on the podcast, that would be an incredible resource for you. That's it for today. I hope to see you on the inside in the dojo membership. And I'm not going to say it. I almost did. And you will hear from us very soon. Peace out, everybody.